I want to start off by reading an email that I got this week, and I'm thinking of it in relationship to blessing. If you have been here for a few weeks, you might remember that we are trying to take on a couple particular spiritual disciplines. One is the discipline of engaging with the Word, and so we're encouraging everyone to read through the book of Philippians every week, because we're going to have several weeks of preaching through Philippians, so read that every week. But the other discipline is the discipline of blessing. Every week, trying to bless someone who is in the body. And it can be very, very simple. Send a text saying, I'm praying for you, or send a verse. It can be more than that. And then try to bless someone who is outside of the body. Again, very simple. Downstairs we got some big cabinets for storage, and so the guy delivered them. And I don't know if it's typical to give a tip to delivery people, but I thought we're supposed to bless people, so I just gave him a couple extra euro, said go buy a beverage, or whatever he wanted. But that was a very simple way of trying to bless someone. But this email was a blessing to me this week, and it was a way in which you, as a body, have been a blessing to other people. In fact, you have been kind of living out some of the values we're looking at in Philippians, and so I was grateful for this email, not just for the sake of this person, but for the sake of being a part of this body that is doing something like this. But this was the email. Good morning from Ottawa, Canada. I just want to say God bless you all. Thank you very much for inviting me into your house. House, not like our personal house, but this house. Thank you for inviting me into your house for my short visit to the wonderful city of Riga. I was only with you for 2 services. However, the warmth and love you all shared with each other and myself will be with me for the rest of my life. Being away from my wife and young son are part of life in the military. He's in the Canadian Army, and so he was here on assignment briefly. So he says, just being away from wife and young son are part of life in the military. People like you help people like me. Again, that people like you, that's you. This wasn't just to me, this was to Communitas. People like you help people like me get through the difficult journeys serving our nations require us to endure. In the military, at times, it can be difficult to find ways to defeat evil with love as Jesus instructed us to do, but it is possible. Meeting and praying with you help me carry the light given to me by Jesus. I hope that should any of your flock find themselves in a small town in Canada, that I can provide as warm and welcoming an experience to you as I was shown by you all. God bless you all. I have faith that our paths will cross again. And then he had a P.S. I bought a Communitas mug from you and use it every day. He might have written that because maybe he was afraid I wouldn't remember who he was, and I would remember that he got one of our cups. But I did remember who he was. But you were just living out some of our values. And so someone who was here just for a couple weeks, was touched by that, and just, whatever it was, 6 months later, kind of out of the blue, that's still in his heart and mind. We helped him for just a little part of his journey. And then he blessed us by writing that back to us. Anyway, I just wanted to share that with you because that was certainly good news to me. So we're looking at Philippians, and we started looking at this short letter by Paul last week. And one of the key verses we looked at this week is as Paul begins his personal word to this church that was very close to his heart. He said, I thank my God every time I remember you, always offering prayer with joy in my every prayer for you all, in view of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now. And so this church was a partner with Paul in his mission. They were a partner by sending money, which is one reason Paul wrote this letter. They sent one of their own members to help him, who made a journey from Philippi, probably to Rome. And then they prayed for Paul. And then they supported Paul's mission by themselves being a light in that city of Philippi. They were part of Paul's mission team, and that's where Paul's joy comes from. And though we won't really talk about it too much today, Paul is in prison, and yet he's constantly talking about the joy that is possible even though he is in prison. And he has this joy because no matter what's going on, the gospel is spreading. And then last week I suggested that this seems to be the thesis statement of the letter. Paul says, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel. And I talked some about that word, conduct yourself. It's the idea of live your life as a citizen. You belong to this city, and the people in Philippi are proud of their city. As I said, even though it's in Greece or Macedonia, it's a Roman city, and their Roman citizenship is important. It's a little piece of Rome, that's planted in Macedonia, and they're proud of that. Rome, this great eternal city, not so eternal really, but that was, what they thought about Rome and how mighty this whole empire was, and they're proud of who they are, and they're proud of their city. And Paul says, if you're proud of yours, like you'd be proud of your city of Philippi, you want to live appropriately to that, to commend your city. Now you are citizens of heaven. Now live appropriately to that. Conduct your life in a way that brings honor to your citizenship. So that whether I come and see you or remain absent, I will hear these two things. And these are the two things that Paul is going to explain will help you to live worthy of the gospel. Standing firm in one spirit, and then striving with one mind together for the faith of the gospel. And the rest of the letter more or less follows that pattern. I didn't ask Nenad's permission to do this, so sorry, but I didn't want to ask your permission in case you said no, and I didn't want a no answer. But sometime this week, Nenad sent me an email with some questions he had about the sermon. And, I really like this. And one of the encouraging things about this is his questions, most of them I already had planned to answer in the course of this sermon series. So that made me feel good that maybe this series is on track. But honestly, it's nice. I'm glad people are engaging and thinking, and sometimes disagreeing. That's perfectly okay. Anyway, these were Nenad's 4 questions after the sermon last Sunday. How does the first 26 verses fit in the structure of the letter, and where? What is the main point of those first 26 verses, everything leading up to that thesis statement? And what is Paul doing with these verses? And I've already given some hints to that answer, and some of that will come out more, but keeping in mind this letter is not a theological book. It is a personal letter to people that Paul knows personally. And so part of what the first 26 verses are doing is he's just making a personal connection, and telling this church what's going on in his life. And then number 2, what does it mean to stand firm, and how that practically looks like? That's answered in chapter 2 of Philippians, and that's next week's sermon. Okay, so that will be, I hope, more or less decently answered next week. Then what does it mean, striving side by side for the faith of the gospel, and what does that practically look like? And basically, chapter 3 of Philippians, Paul answers that question, and that is the sermon for 2 weeks from now. Okay, so those will be answered, and I already had in mind, so thanks, Nenad, that made me feel good that I was on track. Then number 4, if this thesis, in this thesis, where exactly do these points from these 3 verses come up later in the letter? What are the verses in other chapters that mention that again, like stand firm, one mind, striving side by side? And so part of that is what I want to answer today, or talk about today, especially focusing on this word or this phrase, one mind, or the word mind. And as I'm going to point out, it's found often in the letter of Philippians. Last week I talked about how the word joy and that concept is found about 15 times throughout the letter. And then the word gospel, or words that mean the same thing, about the same number of times, But also this idea of your mind and your thinking also comes up roughly 15, 16 times throughout the letter. And that's what I want to focus on today. I said last week that Paul writes not as a psychologist, but as a missiologist. And the point I was making from that is that with that word joy, a lot of people focus on the word joy in the book of Philippians, and so there's a lot of stuff written on Philippians all about joy and sermons about joy, which of course is an important word, but sometimes those sermons are very, very, it's like a counselor, and it's just kind of be joyful, be happy, and it's just all Paul is saying, just be happy, make yourself happy, and so forth. And I argued last week that that's not quite what Paul is doing. The foundation of the letter is the gospel. And joy comes from that. It derives from the gospel. It's not mainly about joy, it's mainly about gospel. But if the gospel is advancing, and since it's the gospel of Jesus Christ, it is going to advance. It is going to win. Then that should bring us joy. So that's why I said Paul, isn't using joy just like in a psychologist, be happy, make yourself happy. He's a missiologist. He's a theologian who thinks about mission, and everything that he says comes out of talking about mission. The mission of God is underneath and around and in the middle of and above all of Paul's thinking. And this letter to this church at Philippi is all about mission. So he's mainly a missiologist. Nevertheless, the truth is, there are actually some psychological benefits to sort of, following the advice that Paul gives here. So for instance, what I was thinking of is a field of psychology that's called cognitive psychology. By the way, I'm not a psychologist, okay? I'm not a counselor so much. I don't have a lot of answers for people, to be honest. Other than trying to look at the Bible and explain what it says, I don't have a lot of good advice to give people. My mind doesn't kind of think as a psychologist, but one of the reasons I want to do this briefly is that as you're interacting with people, people who maybe haven't grown up in the Word or in church, and if you're trying to find points of connection with people, using vocabulary that they might be familiar with might be a tool for that. Paul actually does that in Philippians in some verses we're going to look at later, where he says, whatever is true and honorable and so forth. Those are all words and virtues that were important in Greek and Roman culture. Paul is borrowing those words, things that were good in pagan culture, and I think is quite intentionally listing those things, to say that this is how you can live in society. This is how you connect with people. And so that's why I just want to kind of just get our minds thinking about our minds and the importance of our thinking. This might be a way of connecting what you're reading in Philippians. If you're telling someone, oh yeah, I'm reading Philippians. Someone asks you, what are you reading? I'm reading Philippians every week. You might not say that, but you could. And Philippians, what's Philippians? Well, it's a letter in the New Testament. And why are you reading that? And what is it doing for you? Why are you reading it every week? That's weird. Who in the world reads something every week like that? What is it doing for you? This might be a way to have a conversation with people and begin to connect Philippians with their life. So cognitive psychology is a lot about our thought processes and the importance of thinking about our thinking, and even about language. I'm going to point out, later on in other sermons, particular words Paul uses, why he chooses certain words, because when you label something a certain way, you force people to think about it a certain way. That's why labels are dangerous, and we should be slow to label people. But language is important, and so Paul does that. And memory, in chapter 2, next week, he's going to remind them about the story of Jesus. Because that story is what controls who they are and how they're supposed to live. As I said a couple weeks ago, story tells us who we are and how to live. And so Paul is going to remind them, okay? And so this is just an area of psychology that focuses on what's going on in your mind, and pay attention to what's going on in your mind and make some effort to think a certain way. And then that leads to cognitive therapy, where I don't necessarily know what I'm talking about. This is mainly, I found this on Google. I just knew that cognitive psychology existed, and it might have some connections to things Paul says. So the 3 C's. Catch. Identify the thought that came before the emotion. Why do you react a certain way? What is it that you're what's in your mind, what is in your belief system that causes you to react a certain way. So just catch that, find it, and then check. Reflect on how accurate and useful the thought is, and then change it if you can. Change the thought to a more accurate or helpful one as needed. I mean, Paul is in prison, and some of his friends are continuing his ministry. He's in prison, he can't preach, so they're doing it. And Paul is excited about that, he's glad about that. But then some are also doing it, but for very bad motives. It's like, ha ha, Paul, you can't do it anymore, you're in prison. Now I'm the big guy, I'm the big shot, preaching the gospel, not you. So Paul could have any number of emotions in reaction to that. He could be angry or upset or disappointed. Okay, and so how does Paul react? Well, we saw that last week. He actually rejoices, even people preaching out of poor motives, because, he's got a belief, a thought that controls his emotion, and so he can remain steady in prison, because his mind, his belief system is in control over his emotions and not the other way around. So, in Philippians, the word mind is used about 8 times, if I counted correctly. 6 of those 8 times it says, be of the same mind, or be of one mind. So we need to find out, what does that mean to be of one mind? When I look across, this group and how diverse you are, there's no way all of you are one mind in everything. I mean, I know for a fact you're not. And I know many of you are not completely in one mind with me about everything, So what does Paul mean by being of the same mind or one mind? Paul talks about having knowledge and insight so that you can determine something. He talks about being convinced of something. He's got to make a decision or sort through how he wants his life to unfold, and he becomes, by thinking it through, convinced of what he wants to happen. He talks about regarding things in a certain way. I mean, he says, I regard things in a certain way. He says even Jesus regarded things in a certain way. Jesus actually had some options about how, what he was going to do. He regarded things in a certain way, and Jesus made certain decisions and acts, and that's what Paul is going to talk about in chapter 2. In this case, he did not regard something as something. Instead, he took a different path, but it's all about a thought process. Then Paul talks about whatever is true and lovely and so forth. We'll read that in a moment. Think about these things. That is, keep them going over in your mind. Let these kinds of things be what organize your thoughts. And then finally, in chapter 4, Paul talks about learning something so that he now knows it. He knows how to do something because he has learned something. So most of these we're going to look at. I just want for now to point out, this idea of your mind and what's happening in your mind is very, very important. I mean, our emotions are important, our bodies are important, but our minds are important. There's the stereotype of when, Christians walk in a church, they kind of have to turn their brain off. I talked about that cartoon of, people walking in line of people walking in the church, and, where they usually leave their coats, they open up their skull and take their brain out. But that's people's stereotype. Christians, to be a Christian, you've got to be a little bit stupid and not think. It should be obvious that Paul was very much a thinking person and encouraged thinking, but thinking in a particular way. So what is this way of thinking, and what difference does it make? I said last week that if we know why, we will better know what and how. Knowing why doesn't automatically answer all of our questions, but the better we know why we are doing what we are doing, what it is for, the better we can answer what and how questions. On our website, we have this quote from a missionary named Alan Hirsch, who's talked about communitas, and it's kind of from him that I first came across this term communitas, the name of our church. So he says, communitas describes the dynamics of a Christian community that forms itself around a common mission, that calls them onto a dangerous journey. Now, why would anyone choose a dangerous journey? To unknown places. A mission that calls the church to shake off its collective securities and plunge into the world of action. The church at Philippi was a communitas, not just a community. It was a community. It wasn't a perfect community. There was some, disagreement among some people in the church. It wasn't a perfect community, but it was a communitas because it lived its life. It existed not for itself, but for people outside of itself. And it was on a dangerous journey. I mean, to be in Philippi, a Roman city, to say Jesus is Lord in Caesar's city is to put yourself under the threat of death. Paul is in prison because he will say Jesus is Lord. He's not in prison because he's running around being a jerk. Most of the Roman leaders that Paul comes across, they really seem to respect Paul. If you remember the stories in Acts, they would like to let him go. Okay, but the problem is he just keeps saying Jesus is Lord, and you can't do that. You got to say Caesar is Lord. But Paul won't do that. Okay, so he's put himself on this dangerous path with Jesus Christ. Why would he do that? What is going on in his mind that would cause him to just persist in this path and this message no matter what? So, what did that look like for Paul? What did it look like for Paul to have a particular kind of mind, particular focus? And how did that why answer help him to know what and how to live? Well, in chapter 1, verses 19 to 26, that's kind of a first example where you see a thought process for Paul that leads him to certain conclusions. So he's in prison, but he says, I know this will turn out for my deliverance through your prayers and the provision of the Spirit of Jesus Christ. He's hoping that he will be released from prison. According to my earnest expectation and hope that I will not be put to shame in anything, but that with all boldness Christ will even now as always be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. Be exalted in my body, even by life or death. Even if my body has to die, he doesn't want to be put to shame. He wants to live with boldness. For to me to live is Christ. Of course, that sounds great. Of course, yeah, anyone who's a follower of Jesus would want to be able to say, yeah, to live is Christ. Of course. To die is gain. To die is gain. How often, I mean, don't actually raise your hand, but how many of you this week, had the thought, wow, to die is gain. That would just be great. I really hope I get killed this week. I doubt many of you had that thought this last week. To die is gain, Paul says. How can anyone think that? But this is the dilemma Paul has. He says, if I am to live on in the flesh, this will mean fruitful labor for me. And I don't know which to choose. I'm hard pressed from both directions. Because he says, I have a desire to depart and be with Christ, which is very much better. That's what Paul really wants. To be done with this world and just to be with Christ. In Paul's mind, that is better. That would be gain. Yet to remain on in the flesh is more necessary for your sake. But convinced of this, that to remain in the flesh is more necessary, he says, I know that I will remain and continue with you all for your progress and joy in the faith. Paul would rather be dead, but mainly, even more important than that, he wants his life to make a difference in other people's lives. So even though he would rather be gone from this, he's choosing, I'm just going to stay here because really, for now, I want the gospel to advance. So this is Paul's hope, not to die, even though that's better, but to remain. I just want you to see the thought process. He's got these two things, and both are kind of good. What Paul would really like, would be easiest for Paul, or give him the most joy, would be to die and be with Jesus. But he's all about the gospel. He's all about the gospel. And being all about the gospel, his choice is, I need to stay and remain for your benefit. And so if Jesus wants me to stay alive, if I get out of this prison, then I'm going to go back to preaching the gospel, because I want my life to bear fruit for the gospel. That's the kind of mind that Paul has. That's the process he's going through. And then the other example we'll look at this morning is in chapter 4, where Paul kind of returns to some personal words to this church. Part of the reason Paul wrote this letter is that this church had sent him money. They sent one of their representatives, Epaphroditus. We'll meet him next week. And he's brought this, sum of money to Paul to support Paul in the mission. This church had previously sent money to Paul. They are a very generous church, even making themselves poor for the sake of contributing. So Paul is writing a thank you letter. Philippians is partially a thank you letter for this church. But he says in verse 10 of chapter 4, I rejoice in the Lord greatly that now at last you have revived your concern for me. That is, they sent money. In the past, they had sent a lot of money. Then for some reason, they hadn't been able to send much. Now they've sent some more. So he says, I'm grateful that you have done that. Indeed, I know you were concerned before, but you lacked opportunity. But then he says this, not that I speak from want. He's saying, I'm not thanking you for this money because I really needed that money. He's grateful for the money because he knows that it shows that these Philippians are partners in the gospel. He knows it's to their credit that they're giving money. That's why he's grateful for the money, but not mainly because he himself needed the money. Because he says, I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I am. I've learned this. I know how to get along with humble means, that is when he has almost nothing. And I also know how to live with prosperity. In any and every circumstance, I've learned the secret of being filled and going hungry, having abundance and suffering need. He says, I've learned this. I've practiced this. And now, whatever the circumstances, I'm okay. And I think, when Paul had a lot, he would receive it joyfully. In his travels, there'd be times when there would have been some wealthy Christians with nice houses. We find them in the Bible. Philemon, Aquila and Priscilla. When Paul was in their town, Paul would stay with them. I imagine he had a nice bed. I imagine he had good food. I doubt Paul was ever like, no, I'll just have a piece of dry bread. I'm thinking if they were pouring the wine and putting the goat or whatever on the table, that Paul was eating it and rejoicing. If God is giving you abundance, then he learned just to take it and be grateful. Don't give some kind of false spirituality. Oh, no. He took it, but also he had practiced and learned when he didn't have it, then that was okay as well. He was content with that, not complaining, not whining, not thinking about the good old days when, the wine and the goat was just pouring on the table. He had learned that. This isn't a great illustration, but I just think about, many of you who are, come here from abroad, and if this is your first year in Riga, and if you come from southern places, what you felt this morning. This is the first of like 6 months of this, you know what I'm saying? And so this might be a really tough winter for some of you. It's okay if you need to complain about the cold. It's okay. we understand. But the truth is, you can actually learn. You know, so I can handle the cold much better now than I could 25 years ago when I first came. You know, 25 years ago, you know, if it was like 1 to 5 degrees, this is freezing. Now it's like -10. That's no big deal. It really doesn't get cold till it's like -15. You know, then it's cold, but hey, -5, that's nothing. You know, you could almost wear a t-shirt or whatever. Okay, not quite, but the point is, literally your body adjusts to that. Now I can't deal with the heat. Honestly, it's the heat really bothers me. The cold I'm okay with. But this is what has happened to Paul. He's just given his life to the gospel, and it's sent him all over the place, on land, on ships, in all sorts of danger, in the sea, and shipwrecked, and in prisons multiple times. And he's just learned, he's practiced, and he can just be content. He's got control of his mind. His thought process has been transformed because he knows why, and he's practiced it. You know? And so now he can be content. Whatever God brings him, he receives it as a gift. God brings lots of his needs being met. Thank you. It's not the case. Thank you. Either way, he's glad he can be a part of God's mission. So he says in verse 13, I can do all things through him who gives me strength. This, by the way, is one of those phrases from Philippians that has often, been misapplied. I can do this. I can go out and do this. I can do all things, and I can do all things. And there's a teacher years ago who used to say in the Bible, all means all, and that's all means. Except that's not true. Words mean what they mean in context. Okay? Paul has something specific in mind when he says, I can do all things for the gospel. That's what Paul has given his life for. That's the entire context of this promise. I can do all things for the gospel, especially endure pain and sorrow and hunger and thirst. I can do that through him who gives me strength. Because it's his mission. It's Christ's mission, and he's on Christ's mission, and he can do it because Christ is with him. And Christ might give him a table full of food. He might give him nothing, but he can survive that. He can endure that. He can be joyful through that because he knows his why. He's answered the why question about his life, and the what and how now just kind of falls in place. So he has a perspective about his life, about everything, and it all revolves around Jesus and his mission, and that gives him a perspective to look at things differently than the average person looks at things. But then what might that look like for Communitas? For the Communitas at Philippi and for the Communitas here in Riga, what might this look like? What does Paul say in Philippians that might more directly apply to us? So again, the thesis statement: live your lives worthy of the gospel of Christ, standing firm in one spirit, then with one mind striving together for the gospel. The very next chapter, at the beginning of chapter 2, and we'll look at this more in depth next week, Paul a number of times repeats this word mind. Be of the same mind, with humility of mind, then have the same mind in you, which was also in Jesus Christ. So you have this in 4-5 short verses, this mind, think a certain way, be of one mind, and you will see that mind in Jesus Christ. What is this one mind that he is talking about? I mean, does he mean literally that, everyone thinks alike? That can't be the case. I mean, that's never been the case in any kind of body. And in our Communitas is an international church. Just think of, you are literally from all over the globe, coming from many different languages. Some of you have spent a lot of time in church. Some of you not so much time in church. You come from different churches, different countries. There's no way in the world that we can all be like-minded in the sense of just believing everything the same. We are very intentionally broad in our theology. Okay, we have a few things in the center that are the core, but you'd be amazed at the breadth of belief in this church. And that's intentional that we allow that. How can we be of one mind? Well, it's not the same in every detail, but we can be in one mind in the sense that we accept one purpose. We are one mind in that Jesus is the center. Okay, that we don't deviate. Nothing else can ever be in the center of this body. Jesus Christ will be in the center. And we are about the mission. We are about the gospel. We understand we exist for a purpose, and what we do is for a purpose, and we can be united in that purpose. How you live out that purpose is going to be different. I mean, there's very different gifts, strengths, and so forth, and so how each of you lives out your mission might look very, very different. Okay, but we're about that mission, and we are united, and we have the same purpose. And so we won't necessarily assert our own preferences. We will be humble with humility of mind. We accept others with their differences. Aaron might have some really screwed up theology, for all I know. I don't think he has it. But I'm not trying to fix everything about Aaron. Okay? I mean, I'm probably the last person to do that anyway, but the point is, it's not, my primary role here is not to fix everyone's theology. Okay? I mean, that's why there's certain things I teach a lot about, and some roads we haven't gone down. Not because I don't know what I believe, because I do know what I believe, but my role, I think, is to keep reminding us of the center. And we all have to submit to that. And then that comes up again in chapter 4. Paul says, I urge Euodia and urge Syntyche to live in harmony, be of the same mind. It's actually that mind word, to have the same mind with one another in the Lord. And you, he's addressing to other people in the church, you help these women who have shared in my struggle in the gospel. I like this so much because it's so real. I mean, this church at Philippi is a great church. Paul loves this church. I think he has a special relationship with it. And here are these two women who are part of the gospel team. They've sacrificed for the gospel. They're good and no doubt mature women. And it has just so happened that something has happened where they're at odds with one another. I hesitate to mention this because I don't hope there's none of you, chauvinist kind of guys there. Of course, that would happen to the women. I'm pretty sure there was a lot of bickering among the men as well. But in this case, these two women, they're at odds with one another, and Paul has heard about it, and he's just saying this, if you're going to be this communitas in Philippi, straighten this out. Help these women to work through this, restore that relationship so that you will continue to live worthy of your citizenship in heaven. But it's help them to have the same mind, same purpose. And then right after this thesis statement, another interesting thing Paul says here is, with one mind striving together for the gospel, in no way alarmed by opponents. Because there are opponents in Philippi and all over the Roman world. For to you it has been granted for Christ's sake, not only to believe in him. Again, another nice spiritual statement. Yes, we believe in him because it's a gift, and we're followers of Jesus because of Jesus, and so it's been granted to us. It's a gift to us. It's grace to us to be followers of Jesus, but not only to believe, but also to suffer for his sake. Again, it's a different kind of perspective here. It has been granted to you. It has been gifted to you. It is a grace to you that you are allowed to suffer. That's not mainly their suffering, their gift to God, their suffering. It's actually that's God's gift to them. That he allows them to participate so much in the gospel that they're even going to experience what their Lord Jesus experienced. They're going to have the same journey, the same experience that Jesus experienced. And that's God's gift to them more than it is their gift to God. See, that's a whole different kind of perspective. To not only endure it, but to actually give thanks for it. By the way, I'm not, in talking about this, I don't at all want to imply that, this is me. I figured this out and I do this myself. Not only can I not be grateful for real suffering, I can't really thank God for even, the non-suffering, like, being caught in traffic or something, meaningless like that. I can hardly even be joyful with that. In fact, I don't know if I've ever managed to be joyful. So I'm not talking about some way in which I've succeeded. I still am having to learn this perspective, that you can look at everything in life differently. A couple of other examples. I'm just going to read these, and I won't take time to comment on them like I had originally planned. But these are just more examples of what it looks like for a communitas to live out this one mind idea. In chapter 3, Paul said, "Brothers, join in following my example and observe those who walk according to the pattern you have in us. For many walk, of whom I am often told you, now tell you even weeping, that they are enemies of the cross of Christ, whose end is destruction, whose God is their appetite, their glory is in their shame. They set their minds on earthly things." Same mind word. Other people set their minds on earthly things. So their why is, I want, my life is here, I want what's here. Their mind is here. They live for earthly things, and so their mind is on earthly things, and that answers are what and how they pursue earthly things. But our citizenship is in heaven, so our mind needs to be in a different realm from which we eagerly wait for a Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ. Then in chapter 4, another use of these mind words. Paul said, "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is good repute, if there's anything excellent, if there's anything worthy of praise, dwell on these things. Think about these things. Let these things run through your mind. Bring them before your eyes." I thought about that, whatever is true, and I couldn't help but to think about the false, the fake news syndrome that we're living at, where it really is almost impossible to know what to believe anymore. But it really is a shame. It does bring disrepute on the Church of Jesus Christ when His people who ought to be thinking constantly post stuff that they never check out to see if it's actually true. And you constantly see it if you're on social media. In fact, maybe if we took Paul's words seriously here, we would just not be on social media. I don't know. But you constantly see someone posting something that they got and they didn't stop to think, is this true? And they reposted it. And sometimes it's so obviously and absurdly false. But we just repeat that, and everyone sees it because it's social media. And what does everyone think? Oh yeah, there's those Christians who don't know how to think. Whatever is true, Paul said, whatever is true. Whatever is true. But then the last example of what it means for a communitas and the thought process that is necessary is found back in chapter 1. And this is how Paul prays for this church. And if you're never quite sure how to pray for someone, this would be a great prayer to pray. Just pray Scripture for someone, and this would be a great one to pray for anyone. If you want to pray this for me, then here you go. There's your prayer. It's pretty short. You can, pray for me in a couple seconds and you're done with it, But anyway, this I pray, that your love may abound still more and more in real knowledge and all discernment. So love for who? It's just love. Paul doesn't say love for God, love for one another. It's just be a more loving person, but not just kind of a vague love, but a love that is centered or grounded in knowledge and discernment. Knowledge here, when it's used in the New Testament, is always about spiritual knowledge. Knowing God, knowing the truth. in real knowledge and all discernment, knowing how to live, discerning how to act in each situation, so that you may determine and approve the things that are best, in order to be sincere and blameless until the day of Christ, having been filled with the fruit of righteousness which comes through Jesus Christ to the glory and praise of God. So, growing in knowledge, growing into discernment, so that we can discern, figure out the things that are best, the things that are excellent. Not just the things that are good, but the things that are most important. We're not on our own trying to figure that out. Already what I've said today and last week, we already have the hints about what is best. What is best is the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's what's best. That's what's most important. That's more important than other things. And so as we're going about our individual lives, how to make decisions, should I go here or do that, this job, this relationship, this place, what to do as a church, should we do this or that? We always have to come back to the question, what does this have to do with the gospel? How will this choice advance the gospel? Or how can I use this choice or this circumstance to advance the gospel? How can I think through my life with the gospel showing a light on it to tell me this is what to focus on, this is what to do. This is how we determine what is best, by asking that question, what does any of this have to do with Jesus Christ and His kingdom spreading on this earth? A couple weeks ago, I put on our group page this image, and I just asked the question, as you're reading Philippians, read it with this in mind, and just see what you see in Philippians with this in mind. Our greatest fear should not be failure, but of succeeding at something that doesn't really matter. Our greatest fear should be leading our lives, succeeding in something that in the end doesn't matter. There's an amazing writer who was a journalist, became a Christian, Malcolm Muggeridge, and he wrote this huge autobiography that's called Chronicles of Wasted Time. And he talks about all these important people that he met. I mean, politicians and writers. And, during World War II, he was kind of in the intelligence agencies and was doing all sorts of stuff. And when he came to know Jesus, he said it was all a waste. And all these people, he talks about interviews, and he says somebody even told him, I spent all my life trying to do this. I was this politician. I got all this stuff done. And now it means nothing. It's all gone. It's all wiped out. All those decisions our government made, they're all gone. They made no difference whatsoever. Men who had given their lives to something that was already over before they died. Chronicles of wasted time. I don't know if any of you are into the Star Wars world. I imagine most of you are not. But if you are into Star Wars, here's another bearded guy. I'm kind of afraid of showing images of bearded guys because downstairs there's a Latvian Biblical Center thing that's got me actually there. And then Dustin isn't here. I should... in the entrance, there's that picture of William Fettler, and he's got glasses and a little beard, and he said, hey, that looks like you. I wasn't going to smack him or anything, but man, I hope I don't. But anyway, here's another bearded guy from the Star Wars world. Many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view. That same character in a later movie, but an earlier part of the story, another bearded guy, also a different actor. But this is why I thought about this, because from that film, that first line, be mindful of your thoughts. I just still remember that. Be mindful of your thoughts. Be mindful of your thoughts. Think about what you think about. If you don't think about what you're thinking about, then it's just your body, your brain is just going to naturally react. You're going to stay in these ruts wherever, your mind usually falls. If you think of a dirt road and where the tires always go and tires just naturally fall in that place, you got to drive carefully to get out of that rut. Your mind does the same thing. And if you're not mindful of your thoughts, you're going to fall into that track and you're just going to follow that. I mean, I remember years ago driving a four-wheel drive, a Jeep, and it was in the dirt road, and you know, I was trying to drive up on the ledge and not in these very deep ruts. You know, I wasn't a very good driver, at least of that kind of vehicle at that time, and I went into the ruts, and you didn't have to steer anymore. Literally, I could just push on the gas, and you know, the Jeep would just go, you know, in those ruts, you know, and it was very hard to drive out of that. Same way with your mind. Be mindful of your thoughts. Think about what you're thinking about. You've got to, we have to remind ourselves of what's in the center. What's the foundation? Remind ourselves of Jesus Christ. Remind ourselves of the gospel. Tell ourselves our citizenship is in heaven. Our primary citizenship is in heaven. I've got to walk worthy of that more than walking worthy of any other kind of allegiance. We're going to sing another song. Teresa's going to come up and lead us in another song here. I'm really grateful for the songs Teresa's picked today, because she spent some time looking at Philippians, and pretty much all the songs have a connection to Philippians, especially this next song that we're going to sing. It's straight out of Philippians chapter 2. So please pay attention to the words, and as you read Philippians this week, you know, consider this song. Yeah, so let's sing.